The night always smelled the same in that garage, diesel and cutting oil and the particular damp of old metal that hasn't moved in years. I had a half-rebuilt vintage engine on the stand, its crankcase open, and I was wiping my hands on a rag that was already past saving. The blueprints on the bench were weighted down with a torque wrench. The old truck under the tarp hadn't run since before I was born. They say a thing is only as good as the hands that made it. My grandfather told me that. He ran a restoration shop out of a converted barn, and he could mend anything. Carburetors, clock movements, a neighbor's broken rice mill, a wartime field radio someone dug out of a hillside. He worked by feel as much as by measure, but his feel was calibrated by 40 years of measure, so it amounted to the same thing. When he died, he left me his micrometers and his habit of looking at broken things the way other people look at puzzles. Not with frustration, but with a kind of patient attention, waiting for the object to explain itself. So could I. Mend things, I mean. Anything can be rebuilt if you understand how it was made. I was surveying a dead mine the week they were going to seal it. The commission was straightforward. Assess the old ore cart winches, document their condition, determine whether any hardware was worth salvaging before the entrance was sealed for good. The mine had flooded years back, and the company had walked away from it, but the winch mechanisms were supposedly still intact in the upper gallery, above the waterline. Just another job. I went in with a headlamp and a notebook, and the particular alertness I always carry in old structures. Not fear, just attention. Timber shoring, black water below, the smell of iron and cold stone. My headlamp beam caught a seam in the rock wall that I hadn't seen on the survey maps. The ore in it had a faint luminescence, wrong in a way I couldn't immediately name. Not phosphorescence, not reflected light, something else. I leaned in to look at it more closely. The seam flared. The sound was enormous, and then there was no sound at all. I woke on cold ground the color of ash. The surface under my palms was packed earth, gray and fine, and above me, far above, spanning the whole sky, was a dome of pale light, not sunlight, not any light I had a word for. It was the color of something that had once been brighter, and it was fraying at the edges, the way old silk frays when you pull a thread. I lay there for a moment. My coveralls were still on, my headlamp was gone. And then it wasn't, I thought, meaning the mine, meaning everything I'd known 5 minutes ago. I sat up. This isn't the mine. It wasn't. It was a walled town. I've been in open-air museums. I've walked through reconstructed Joseon-era villages where the buildings were maintained by a historical foundation and the forges were lit twice a year for demonstrations. This was nothing like that. This was old the way a working thing is old, worn where hands had touched it, patched where it had cracked, the walls thick and uneven with generations of repair. The streets were packed earth and stone, the roof lines were heavy tile, frost gray in the cold air. Beyond the walls, mountains rose on every side, iron dark, their slopes dense with pine. The ore in those ridges was visible even from here, rust-red veins running through the gray rock like old wounds. And over all of it, that dying light, the dome. Up close it was worse. I could see the structure of it, or thought I could. Not a single surface, but a layered thing, and the layers were separating. A walled town, old as a museum and twice as cold, and over all of it, that dying light. I was still trying to orient myself when I heard the screaming from the ward shrine. The shrine was at the town's center, built around an iron anchor the size of a cart, a massive casting, ornate, covered in inscription marks I didn't recognize. Around it, a ring of acolytes in gray robes were doing something with their hands, something that produced a faint light at their fingertips, and the light was supposed to be feeding into the dome above. I could see the logic of it, even if I didn't understand the mechanism. They were channeling, praying, pushing something through themselves into the structure overhead. It wasn't working. One of them, young, maybe 20, with the posture of someone trained to appear composed, had broken. Her hands were shaking. The light at her fingers stuttered and went dark, and the dome above tore. a long ragged gap opening in the pale fabric of it, and she looked up at it with an expression I recognized, the expression of someone watching a machine fail in a way they don't know how to stop. The thread won't hold, it won't answer. The crowd around the shrine surged backward. Someone was shouting, "The veil! The veil is tearing!" I wasn't watching the veil. Everyone was looking at the light. I was the only one looking at the iron. And the iron was just broken, a cracked casting, a seized linkage, a bearing nobody had greased in 100 years. The anchor at the shrine center had a secondary mechanism at its base, a linkage assembly, iron, connecting the anchor to a series of channels cut into the stone floor. The channels ran outward in a radial pattern, and I could see from where I stood that one of the linkage arms had seized. Rust and mineral deposit, decades of it, locking the joint solid. The acolytes were pouring energy into a system that couldn't transmit it because the mechanical connection was broken. They were praying to a machine that needed a wrench. "That's not a god," I said. No one heard me. I said it again, louder, to no one in particular. "That's a mechanism, and it's jammed." There was a fallen iron rod near the shrine's outer ring, part of a fence post, from the look of it, about 1.5 meters long. I picked it up. The crowd parted around me without quite deciding to, the way crowds do when someone moves with enough certainty. I got the rod under the seized linkage arm and found my leverage point. The joint had been frozen long enough that it wasn't going to move easily. I leaned into it, felt the resistance, adjusted my angle. You don't pray a frozen bearing loose, you break it free. "Come on, move!" The joint cracked. Rust and mineral scale showered down. The linkage arm swung through its arc and seated home with a sound like a bell being struck, and the light above us surged, the tear in the dome knitting shut from the edges inward, the pale fabric pulling itself back together, the acolytes around me gasping as whatever they'd been pushing suddenly found somewhere to go. I stood up. My shoulders ached. I set the iron rod down. The woman who approached me had the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She was perhaps 40, dressed in the armor of a military warden, and her hand was on the hilt of her sword, not drawn, but present, making its point. Behind her, the young acolyte who had broken was watching me with an expression that had shifted from terror to something more careful. "You," the warden's voice was even. "Outlander, you laid hands on the anchor of Iron Ridge and it obeyed you. Who are you?" I didn't have a good answer for that. I was still working out where I was. The young acolyte wasn't speaking aloud, but I could see her working through it. Her lips moved slightly, her eyes tracking from the linkage to my hands, to the sealed dome above. He didn't channel anything. He didn't even try. He just fixed it. I freed one anchor. There were a dozen more out there, all rusting, all failing. I could see them from here, secondary anchor points set into the wall at intervals, each one connected to the dome by the same radial channel system. Their magic was dying and it was never coming back. They knew it too. I could see it in their faces, in the way the crowd looked at the sealed dome with relief that was already curdling into dread, because they understood that the relief was temporary. The young acolyte spoke. Her voice had steadied, though the steadiness cost her something. "It fails everywhere now. We pray harder every year, and every year the light grows thinner. If the mandate is leaving us, what is left?" I crouched down and picked up a chunk of raw ore from the ground near the shrine's base. It had been used as a doorstop, or a weight, or nothing in particular, just a piece of the mountain that had ended up here. I turned it in my hand, heavy, dense, high iron content. From the color of it, and the mountains behind the walls were full of the same. What's left? These mountains are made of iron, and I know exactly what to do with iron. The warden was still waiting for an answer. The acolyte was still watching me. The dome above us was holding, for now, and the cold air smelled of pine and charcoal, and the faint mineral sharpness of ore. I stood up. I was still in my coveralls, still had grease under my fingernails from the engine I'd been working on 6 hours or 600 years ago. I looked at the fraying light at the dome's edges, then at the iron mountains, then at the chunk of ore in my hand. "Stop praying to it," I said. We're going to build something that doesn't need anyone to be born special. Neither of them spoke. From the ground up, I said, starting with this.